Hi everyone, Danielle here with a sprinkle of joy. If you're new here, thank you so much for taking the time to stop by and see what I have posted today. Today I wanted to do another video of what I fed my family for the week. If you remember from a previous video, you know that I went back to work full time. And one of the biggest challenges I found from going from not working full time to working full time was planning meals and getting dinner ready. Because in the past I was able to get a lot of the prep work done when the kids were at school, and then all I had to do was kind of throw it together when I came home. And now that I'm not able to do that, it was getting a little bit complicated. And then to add to that, in December and January, Annabelle started swim team, which meant that we were at practice on Mondays and Tuesdays, and the meets were Wednesdays, then practice was again on Fridays, and then Aubrey also had a dance class on Thursdays. So every night we had something going. And by the time we got back, I wasn't able to put a dinner in the oven that would take an hour to cook, because then we wouldn't be eating until like 7 or 8. So I wanted to share just kind of how I figured out a good way of getting dinner on the table still, even though I'm not at home. So you're gonna see a lot of maybe some frozen meals in this video and crock-pot meals, along with a lot of choose your own leftovers, which, if you know from some of my previous videos, that is always a big thing that I like to do when I am meal planning. Because sometimes I end up with a lot of random leftovers, not enough to feed our family of 5, but enough that each person can have something different, and then we use up the meals and we're not wasting food, and everyone gets kind of something that they want, so I don't hear a lot of whining and complaining about what's for dinner. So I hope that you enjoy this, and that if you're struggling to put meals on your table and coming up with ideas, that this will give you some great ideas of how to feed your family. So as always, once again, I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. And if you have any questions or comments, don't forget to leave a comment below. Thanks. All right, so on this day we're having Wiener Schnitzel. I've already pounded out the pork that I'm using, the pork chops, and I've set my stations up. So the first thing that I do is I dredge the pork chop in flour, and then I dip it in eggs. And then finally, I coat that in some breadcrumbs. Now, I like to get all of my pork done at once, so I usually put them on a cookie tray when I am done, so I can finish up all of the pork chops. And then after that, it is time to fry the pork chops. So I take them out and I put them in a big cast iron skillet, which has some olive oil in it. And after I've let them fry for a few minutes on one side, I flip them over and I do the same on the other side. And then after I'm done with that, I just take them off and I put them in the oven to keep warm while I make some spätzle. So this is a new spätzle maker that we've gotten, and I love it a lot better than my other one. So what happens is you make the spätzle dough and then you kind of force it down through these little holes, and they end up going into boiling water so that the spätzle can get cooked. And then I fry that with some butter. And I add a little bit of salt on it as well. Then I serve this, some pork chops with some spätzle. And it was quite delicious. This is one of those busy days. Autumn has Ninja, and then Aubrey and I and Autumn have Scouts afterwards. So I'm filling up some thermoses to warm them up because the girls have decided they wanted to take some macaroni and cheese, and then they have a little bit of fruit, which is what they will be eating for dinner today. So I filled these up with some nice hot macaroni and cheese, and they will just eat these. Autumn will eat it at Scouts, and Aubrey will eat it while we wait for her sister at Ninja. Now, this is a day that usually we would be at swim, but since Annabelle wasn't feeling that great, we were able to stay home. And I decided to make a side to go with the frozen leftovers that we were having. So I went with just some super simple wild rice. And so I'm boiling this right now. I like to add a little bit of spices in with my rice when I make it. So I have a little bit of salt and then some minced onion. And as you can see, I'm not really measuring. I'm just kind of giving a little bit of a shake, probably about a teaspoon or less. Some minced garlic. And then some parsley. And so I stir that up and I just let that cook about 45 minutes or however long your wild rice or wild rice blend takes. I also decided I would make some potatoes to go along with this, since my family is a huge fan of potatoes, particularly when I bake them in the oven with some spices on them and a little bit of olive oil. And I found that if you really dry your potatoes off well before you cook them, it helps to bake them or crisp them up. All right, so here are my potatoes all cut up. So I drizzled some olive oil on them. Then once again, I've got some seasoned salt and some onion powder and some paprika. And I just toss those all together. And I throw them on a sheet, put them in the oven. And then I've also decided to make some carrots. It had been a very long time since I was able to actually cook anything for dinner, so I was pretty excited to be able to add some nice sides to our frozen leftovers, which were poor man brisket. And if you're wondering, poor man brisket is a smoked chuck roast. So we get a cow and we always end up with a lot of chuck roasts, and I can only make so many stews and pot roasts. So in the summer, we decided to see if we could smoke one, and we did, and it was quite delicious. So now with these carrots, I added a little bit of honey on them and a little bit of balsamic vinegar. Yes, and as you can see, my honey has started to solidify a little bit, so it was a little slow to come out. And then here's what I was talking about. This is the poor man's brisket, which is just a smoked chuck roast, but we will definitely do this again this summer because it was delicious. All right, this is another day where I'm going to be using my slow cooker. And the night before, I got all of the ingredients that I could out, so that was super easy to do in the morning. So I am making a crock pot or a slow cooker chili. So the first thing I have to do is to brown the meat, which because I have this new Ninja slow cooker, I can do right in the slow cooker, which is very helpful. And then these are the veggies, and I ended up cutting these veggies up the night before and just sticking them in the fridge to make the morning much, much smoother. And then adding in all of the canned ingredients to the slow cooker. And give that a good stir. This is me because my children are being crazy in the background, which is why I very rarely have the volume on my videos. And if you're curious, this is the book that I'm using. It's a new slow cooker cookbook that my husband got for Christmas, and really I got, and then with the chili, when I got home from work that day, I made some cornbread muffins because I love cornbread with my chili. Right, so I am making some leftover wild rice soup and adding some extra stock to it because it was definitely too thick when I made it the first time. So that, what I showed before, was some turkey stock from over Thanksgiving. And as you can see, my cats are both very, very interested in what we are cooking. Perhaps not that one, but this one, Pearl, definitely wants this. And this is how that wild rice soup turned out. And I have to say, it was much better than the first time I made it. All right, today is a stew day. And I am a super big fan of making stew. So the first thing I do with my stew meat is I dredge it in some flour and salt and pepper. So here it is. Sometimes I do it in a bag, sometimes I just do it in a bowl. And then I cook it in batches and I brown it. Now, I know some people don't brown their meat, but I do think that it really helps give the meat and the stew some extra flavor. And sometimes I have to do this in batches. So here's how it looks when I'm about done browning it. And as you can see, there's a lot of brown bits on the bottom of the pan, but those are amazing. I like to deglaze the pan with some wine, usually about a cup to a cup and a half. Then I let that boil down some, and I make sure that I get all those brown bits off the bottom of the pan. And so now that it's almost all boiled down, I add back in my stew meat. And then I add some water and my stew seasoning that I have made, and I've linked in the comments below. But I wanted to say I actually found it was easier if I added the stew seasoning to the water first and then poured it in to the pot. It made it clump a little bit less. But I always make a big batch of the stew seasoning at the beginning of the season, and then I just keep it in my cupboard and I use it throughout the fall and winter time. And then I stir that all up and I let that meat cook for about an hour on the stove before I add my vegetables. And here are my children. They wanted to help. So we are peeling some carrots. And then I have some celery here. So I'll add all of these veggies into the pot. I also have some potatoes and onions that I cut up and to add as well. And then I ended up adding a little bit more water because got a little bit cooked down while the meat was cooking. And a little more wine as well. So then you let that cook for about another 45 minutes. Now, if you want my stew recipe, that will be on the blog soon as well. And so I tried making some dumplings to go with the stew, which didn't quite work as well, but the stew was still very tasty.